This is North Korea, a country where your life can be decided before you're even born through a hereditary classification system that ranks families by loyalty to the state, where even something as simple as your hairstyle isn't entirely your choice. Only the most politically trusted citizens are allowed to live in the capital, while the millions remain far from it. Leaving the country without permission is a crime, and the internet people use is controlled by the government itself. So why don't all these human rights groups and so-called compassionate world leaders simply invade and remove the dictator, freeing the people once and for all? Because they can't. North Korea is a nuclear power. The troubling part is that such a system still exists in the modern world, and perhaps the only comfort is that there is only one place like it. But there could have been another if it hadn't been for a war.
Military began major combat operations in Iran.
And that we could be witnessing the final death throes of this current regime.
A regime in turmoil now killing its own people as Iranians cry for help.
We are finished. Take over your government. It will be yours to take.
For Iranians, protest is not new, but the scale and the stakes feel different this time.
Welcome to the Sleuthing Scams, and today we will be talking about why war was the last resort for America. It takes a lot of effort, research, and heart to bring these videos for you, so kindly hit that subscribe button. Iran has lived under an authoritarian system since the Islamic regime took power in 1979. What followed for many citizens felt less like a revolution and more like a slow decline. Women lost many of the freedoms they once had, and strict laws governed how they dressed and behaved. Women like Mahsa Amini became symbols of the regime's harsh enforcement, dying after being detained over alleged hijab violations, while critics often point out the perceived double standards where some families of powerful clerics appear to enjoy far greater personal freedoms.
Went viral shows Ali Shamkhani, a senior advisor to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei.
Meanwhile, Iran expanded its influence in the region through allied groups such as Hezbollah and the Houthis. At home, economic struggles and inflation worsened, and that brought millions of Iranians onto the streets protesting against the brutal regime, only to be killed again in a harsh crackdown. International reports estimated the death toll to be over 30,000, while the Iranian government claimed it was less than 4,000. But all of this only acted as a catalyst. The biggest concern for the United States was something else entirely: Iran's pursuit of nuclear power. And it was just last year that Iran appeared closer than ever. On May 31, 2025, a confidential report from the United Nations nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, was leaked. It revealed that Iran possessed more than 400 kilograms of enriched uranium, enough to potentially produce around 10 nuclear weapons. Then, on June 13, 2025, more than 200 Israeli fighter jets entered Iranian airspace, targeting over 100 nuclear, military, and infrastructure sites. The strikes reportedly killed 6 scientists involved in Iran's nuclear program, but destroying these facilities is nearly impossible, because many of them are built deep underground. That's when the United States brought in the big guns, bunker buster bombs. On June 21st, American forces reportedly used 14 of them in an attempt to eliminate the threat of Iran becoming a nuclear power. While many in the region hoped the danger had finally passed, the reality appeared more complicated. Just 4 days later, Ali Khamenei claimed the strikes had not caused major damage to Iran's nuclear facilities. Human rights groups and growing protests inside the country had already pushed the regime to its limits. But fast forward to January 2026, and the situation exploded. Millions of Iranians poured into the streets as inflation became unbearable, and the strict Islamic laws clashed with the largely secular outlook of much of Iranian society. Food prices rose to 57.9%, and the cost of bread was soared by 94.3%. For the regime, protests were nothing new. Demonstrations had erupted many times before, often ending with thousands arrested and many killed. But this time the fire was different. Even after the regime reportedly made more than 30,000 arrests and thousands were killed, and promised its supporters that it would tackle the protests with lethal force, people refused to back down or bow to the same authority again. And all that happened in a digital blackout, when there was little to no news that made it out. That's when calls for international help began to grow, reaching figures like Donald Trump. Trump warned the regime not to attack peaceful protesters, but when reports emerged of another brutal crackdown, tensions escalated quickly. On February 28th, the conflict took a dramatic turn as the United States and Israel, launched coordinated airstrikes against Iran. In the first wave of attacks, Ali Khamenei and several senior officials were reportedly killed. According to Israeli news outlets, 30 senior Iranian officials were killed in just half a minute of strikes. The news was denied immediately by the Islamic regime, but when the supreme leader didn't arrive for the promised speech on TV, the regime finally admitted of him being killed. The news sparked celebration among many protesters, but it also reminded the world why the possibility of Iran becoming a nuclear power had worried so many countries. In response, Iran retaliated with attacks across the region, targeting almost every country it could reach. The strikes didn't only hit military sites, airports, ports, and even hotels were caught in the attacks. Countries including Israel, Bahrain, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar reported missile or drone strikes as the conflict rapidly spread across the Middle East. At the same time, Iranian-backed groups such as the Houthis began targeting shipping routes near the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz, threatening global trade and pushing the region closer to a wider war. And yes, all this mess also increased the oil prices throughout the globe. But now the question arises, could this war have been avoided? Iran's ballistic missile arsenal is believed to have a range of roughly 3,000 kilometers. That may not have put the United States directly within reach, but it certainly kept much of the Middle East within striking distance, and the region saw just how real that threat was when Iran launched attacks against several neighboring countries. At the same time, reports suggested Iran was closer than ever to developing nuclear capability. If that had happened, it might only have been a matter of time before the United States itself came into the strategic picture. Yes, there are other nuclear powers in the world, and not all of them are allies of the United States. But supporters of this view argue that Iran's political system has been especially confrontational with the West for decades. Another question lingered in the background. How long could ordinary Iranians keep rising up against the regime, knowing each protest might end in another violent crackdown? And how many lives would have been lost before meaningful international support arrived? For some observers, this moment looked like the point where tensions that had been building for years finally collided. In the end, war was never the first choice. For the United States, it became the last resort, not only because of its long conflict with Iran, but because of what the future might have looked like if Iran had crossed the nuclear threshold. Once a regime like that gains nuclear power, removing it becomes almost impossible. The world has already seen this reality with North Korea, where decades have passed and millions still live under a system no outside power can realistically dismantle. For many observers, the fear was that the same permanent darkness could have fallen over Iran, a future where its people might never again have the chance to challenge the regime. At the same time, a nuclear-armed Iran would have created constant anxiety for its neighbors across the Middle East. In that sense, the decision was seen by supporters as an attempt to stop a far more dangerous future before it became irreversible. Subscribe to our channel and don't forget to click the bell icon.